What you're about to see is an experiment. RINGKNOCKER is a group of current and former military officers that have come together for networking, shared opportunities, and mutual fire support. A bull session is what happens when a bunch of guys like us sit around and talk. So a few of us thought we'd pick a topic and do that on camera. This is RINGKNOCKER Bull Session number 1, and our topic is the Agile Project Management Framework. Now, just to orient you, the first participant you'll see is me. I'm Jason Williscroft, and I have the honor of having founded this affiliation of knuckle draggers we call RINGKNOCKER. I'm a former enlisted Marine and a former Navy surface warfare officer, U.S. Naval Academy class of 1995. I left the Navy in 2000 and have been building and breaking businesses in the big data space ever since. The next face you'll see is my Naval Academy classmate, Matt Murphy. Matt is a nuclear submarine officer approaching retirement, if you can believe that, who spent the last 6 years of his Navy career in an area we call joint planning and the rest of the world calls wargaming. If Matt challenges you to a game of Risk, do yourself a favor and don't put any money on the table. Later this summer, Matt will complete his retirement from the Navy and move on into management consulting and private sector strategic planning. We will be joined by Cassandra Koistinen, who graduated from the Naval Academy in 2002 and is also on the retirement glide path. Cassandra describes herself as a recovering surface warfare officer. She is now involved in cryptology and has had the singular Navy experience of being able to create her own career path, and we've done our best to avoid identifying her current employer. Now, I hope you'll agree that this was a super interesting conversation, certainly interesting enough to justify exploring this format more deeply, which we will do next time. But for now, please enjoy RINGKNOCKER Bull Session number 1 on the Agile Project Management Framework. Matt Murphy, holy cow, look at you. Can't hear you.
One more reason wanted me to join audio and video separately. That must be something that I'm not.
Are you joined on your phone or something?
No, I'm on my regular setup here.
Hey, you sound good, man. I feel underdressed.
I thought we were gonna have some little some fun, so I actually had a shtick lined up. I was gonna pretend to be the consultant, getting ready to go to work for the first day. And,
oh Lord, well, it works for me. I
worked a fun backstory just trying to make it funny to start with.
Okay, well, let's. Oh, by the way, were you on when Cassandra Koistinen joined us? Did you recall that name? She was on the last meetup. She's got a podcast. I think she's still in. Anyway, she's joining us, so she'll be here, I guess, in a couple of minutes.
Alrighty. Was that the lady with the microphone?
Yeah.
I just didn't recognize the names all.
Yeah.
When you said podcast, I'm like, oh, wait a second.
Yeah, right. So, so that's it. It's just a real small experiment. I'm pouring myself some coffee here.
It's all I need. Thought about a few questions, and I literally just got done doing my PMI ACP application. I mean, I haven't hit submit yet because I got to finish the course, but right course.
PMI ACP.
Yeah,
what's ACP?
Yeah, it's Agile Certified Professional.
Oh, there you go. Wow.
But just one of those branding things to make sure folks know you can teach this old dog a new trick.
Did you get into what do they call that thing? There's a variation on the Agile framework that is highly engineered, right? And it was all the rage a couple of years ago, and I don't know that it's really sort of out there anymore. No, but it's just not ringing a bell, right?
You're not talking Scrum, are you?
No, Lord no. So the thing about Scrum and Kanban is that they, at least in my experience, work best when they're a little hand wavy, right? I mean, the goal is to provide just enough management on the project to keep everything moving without letting the management become the thing, right? So there's, do you ever read, this is an oldie but a goodie now, a book called Code Complete? Does that ring a bell? Steve something or other. This is back in the 90s, right? So he talked about the the ratio of management activity, counting beans, right, to doing stuff that happens in a project, and how the larger and more complex a project becomes, the more that ratio skews towards management, right? And so you reach this sort of tipping point where, you know, projects begin to groan under their own weight, you know, and finally just sort of collapse because it's all, you know, it's 90% management and nobody's actually doing anything.
No production.
yeah, exactly, right? So, you know, his point, sort of his conclusion was that, you know, things tend to work best when they're small and fast and light, and that anything that you can do to reduce the overhead of project management is a good thing. And it was interesting because this whole conversation happened really before Agile, right? Agile really kind of kicked off in about 2000. Like the Agile Manifesto was published. Have you read the Agile Manifesto?
Yep.
So that was published in, I think, 2000. I think Code Complete came out in 95 or something, 96. There. So, yeah, so really Agile was kind of a response to that, right? Like, how do we do as little as possible and still get it done?
Okay.
Right? Yeah. What is it? The something Agile Framework. I can't remember now. But yeah, so these guys came up with this, it's crazy. Like you look at it's like this giant flow chart, and it's extremely complicated, and there are roles for everybody.
I've heard of disciplined Agile. That's not it, is it?
Well, okay, so yeah, and this was, it'll come to me in a couple of minutes, but this was like this is what happens when consultants take hold of something useful, right? So, right? I'm serious. You know how it goes, right? So you build a structure around it, you know, and a set of theories, and you know, and you write white papers, you know, and you know, and it's got to be complicated, or you can't charge for it, right? So that's where maybe the strong Agile framework, I don't know, but that's where, you know, you got these guys who come in and charge, you know, $50,000 for an engagement, and you know, and basically turn an enterprise upside down, you know, trying to get them quote unquote on Agile, when what do you really need to get on Agile? You need a daily stand-up, right? That's the beating heart of Agile, is a freaking daily stand-up. You know, and you establish that practice, right? So it's one reason why I wanted to kind of sit down with you, right? Because I don't have the faintest idea what they're teaching in sort of Agile certification classes. Yeah. But I bet you that there's some noise there worth cutting through. So
cool.
Hence yeah.
Yeah. As much as I've dug through is the stuff that Scrum.org has on Certified Scrum Master. I went through that stuff pretty solid. And then I'm through all the actual Agile content of what it's an online course that's hosted by Percipio, which honestly doesn't look like it's very good in my opinion, but I'm about to start taking practice tests and find out how good it is or it isn't. But the only kind of bigger thoughts I've had relative to, you know, Scrum as a framework and Agile as an idea is, it seems like it's in its best versions maybe ways to get at human tendencies that are either unhealthy or organizational tendencies that are unhealthy. And, you know, big bloated bureaucracy, yeah, sure, that's one flavor of it. But it seems to try to bake in some organic things that every normal organization, and everybody say, oh yeah, that's a good idea. And then when stuff gets busy, people just let that stuff go by the wayside. And oh, by the way, that's actually the magic sauce of a efficient, highly effective organization. So you talking about a daily stand-up makes sense to me. Although I definitely want to explore what are the flavors and what does that really look like in your view? Yeah. Because the only part that I got any description of was part of the Scrum framework, which you can tell it's this semi-religious level of no one can talk except the team members, and and no one else needs to do anything besides the team members, and don't get in the way of the team members. And if anybody needs to talk about anything else, it's in a separate meeting. Which I went, what? Okay.
That sounds like me. Okay, so we should poke at that, okay? Because the thing about Agile that I think makes it work is that it's not a project management framework in the sense of here are some reports and here's some procedures. What it really is a set of practices, right? In the same sense that if you're into yoga, right, there's no written test, right? There's a practice, there's a daily practice, and you go through your daily practice, and you're doing well when your daily practice comes to you in a fluid manner, right? Same deal here, right? So there is, if you want to take a giant step back, there is one thing that I think is the answer to the why around Agile and any other sort of iterative approach to project management. And basically it's this. In the real world, nothing ever goes the way we planned, right? And so as a consequence, we almost always have to take a second bite at every apple, right? So the big question is, how expensive is that? So if I'm writing software, and this is actually another interesting point in Code Complete from way back when, the cost of changing my mind depends critically on exactly when I changed it. And by the way, this is true, if I'm building a battleship too, right? So if I change my mind about how long the shaft ought to be, right? And I change my mind before anybody's actually drawn any diagrams, that's super cheap. All it takes is a conversation, right? On the other hand, once the keel is laid, whole different story, right? So when you change your mind matters. And so it is a good idea to arrange things in such a fashion that expensive changes of mind, there's Cassandra, so let's let her get connected. Cassandra, can you hear us?
Yep, I'm good. I can hear you.
Yes. Can't see you though.
Oh, hold on. Let me.
I see your dog.
Yeah.
She's coming to us from the dark side.
Yeah, I just have to change my my source, my video source.
No worries. No worries. There you go. Oh yeah. See, look at that studio, man. I'm envious. I'm sitting at a kitchen table right now. We were just Cassandra. We were just kind of talking about sort of the. Are you into software development at all?
Me? No, I definitely am not your technical person at all.
Okay. All right. Well, so basically what we're talking about Agile, right? And this whole Agile methodology and framework. And I was trying to sort of expound a little bit on kind of why do we care? And I was describing to Matt this, there's a book that I was very fond of back in the 90s called Code Complete, where Steve something or other he was talking about software projects and talking about kind of like where and when and how do those things get expensive. And one of his key points was that when you're writing software or building a battleship, right?
Yep.
Changing your mind has a very different cost depending on when you do it, right? If you do it way back at the requirement stage, it's cheap, but if you do it after you lay the keel, it's expensive, right?
Yep.
And so when we think about different sorts of approaches to project management, and there's a spectrum, right? So on one end, you've got what we call waterfall, bad, right? And if you went through the Agile course, like waterfall is everything bad, right? But the whole point of waterfall is we're going to make all of our decisions up front, right? And we're going to we have a design, we're going to write it down, we're going to draw pictures, we're going to create this plan, we're going to understand all the dependencies, and then we're going to work, and 5 years from now, a battleship rolls off the roads, right? And that's how it goes. And if we've done our jobs right, then there haven't been any missteps. Matt's laughing. There haven't been any missteps. Nobody's changed their mind. The project hasn't changed. Everything went according to plan. You're on schedule and under budget, right? But things don't ever actually work out that way. In real life, what happens is, you realize that maybe two parts weren't quite talking to one another. The designs don't match up. There's some inconsistency, something, right? And you've got to kind of go back to the drawing board a little bit and try again, right? And so you have to adjust fire from where you are, right? And again, depending on what kind of project it is and where you are in the project, that iteration, right, where you're sort of going back through the design loop, that iteration can either be, inexpensive or very expensive. But one way or the other, if you need it, right? Unless you want to build the ship you didn't want, or a submarine instead, right? You have to. If you've got to go back and take another bite of the apple, then you don't really have an option. So the whole point of Agile is to recognize that that's a thing and answer the question, okay, well, what if we just did that on purpose, right? What if we arrange the project in such a fashion that we expect to come back and take another bite at the apple? We have a process for coming back and taking another bite at the apple. And in fact, we plan to come back and take another bite at the apple. And when we sequence our work in such a fashion that when we come back and take another bite at that apple, it's as inexpensive as possible. Okay. That's Agile. That's the why of Agile, right? So what we're doing is we're just recognizing the reality of life, that shit, sometimes you screw it up and you got to come back and do it again.
Yeah, well, I was interested. So I actually work in a band, and I'm technically a program manager, even though I haven't really actually done much program management, because the program I have, it's really just a contract that. But so I work in the two, and we try to do these Intel research plans, because it's research. And so we have this, we call it a sprint, but it looks like it's very much based on an agile type concept, where it's the first iteration, they do their research, and then we determine if they kind of top level type research, and then we determine if it's worth us continuing to deep dive, and then we call them sprints or spirals. And so basically we just continue for another iteration as things develop, with the intent that we would turn it over to our developers or other contractors to continue to work where our basically researchers, Intel analysts kind of left off. So this is kind of what kind of got me interested, because if there's anything I can at least take even from now and help our command maybe have a better process, being someone who didn't go through any agile type training, that's kind of where I'm, this kind of perked my interest.
Well, so we're three corners of an interesting triangle then, because I've been running agile teams for a long time. Matt just finished his formal agile certification, but Matt, I don't believe you've ever actually been through an agile production cycle, right? And then Cassandra, you're doing agile, but
meet textbook.
Yeah. Right. So this is an interesting setup that we've got here. Matt, why don't you can you give us a minute, just kind of clue Cassandra in on kind of where you are, and I don't think you guys have actually met except sort of on opposite sides of a large group.
Hey, Cassandra.
Matt Murphy, Cassandra.
It's I'm coming out of being a submariner and then joint planner, getting ready to transition in August, and as part of my little branding and preparation effort for being a civilian, and I'm definitely looking to get outside the lifelines of doing defense-related things. Just that's where I want to get to. I said I'd try to bite into learning to think and talk a little more civilian-like, and in doing so, I picked up a few ideas on where I'm going into is management consulting is an initial strike into doing either full-on strategic planning or maybe some more specialized consulting and turnarounds and restructurings, and maybe a little more finance-oriented things later. But anyway, first strike out the door, get out and help companies fix things and manage things, because I can do that. In any case, so I started off, I got project management professional certified a little over a month ago, and that was pretty straightforward. It's very traditional planning, and but I recognize that there's a whole lot of other energy out there right now on doing iterative-based planning. So I have taken on doing this Agile Certified Professional certification, which is run by the same organization that does the project management professional certification. In between then and now, so I'm almost done with that program, and it's just some set of online courses that it's self-study in preparation for a certification test. In between those two things, I actually picked up something called a Scrum Master certification, and Scrum is this probably subsets the simplest word, but particular framework within some broader ideas of what it means to be agile. And so I did several days worth of bench pressing to get smart on that, and I actually got certified for a piece of that. Just book level smart stuff. But through all of my studies, I've been trying to reflect on, hey, what are the things I've seen and done that I think do kind of pass the sniff test of being agile in nature, and what does agile really mean? What is its value proposition relative to an organization or a project? So I've been thinking about that for probably at least a month and a half, and I've got some ideas, and I think that's part of what I'm looking forward to talking with Jason about and comparing. Hey, what I think what do I think about agile in general, and what do I think I've seen that is agile like versus Jason's extensive experience in actually applying agile as a dedicated framework. So I think that might be my part of this triangle.
Nice.
Oh. So where we were, we were talking about sort of the underpinnings, right? Like where Agile comes from. And, like I said, ultimately, at least my opinion is that it's simply a recognition of the realities of life, which is that you're not going to get anything, especially the bigger and more complex a project is, the less likely you are to get it right, the first time. And so, like it or not, an iteration is gonna happen, right? So Agile is just it's an attempt to do that on purpose instead of by accident, which is generally speaking a good way to approach the world. Probably worthwhile going into a little bit of taxonomy, right? Because you got Agile, you got Scrum, you got Kanban, right? So let me give you a moment on that. So, and again, Matt, I want to defer to your formal training here. I've literally I haven't had a day of formal Agile training, right? So if your professor differs, fine. But here's where I come from. So Agile is, that is an umbrella term, right? It is a common set of approaches that, as I said, attempt to do iteration on purpose instead of by accident, right? And there's a common set of practices that are going to be there in some flavor or another in any of the Agile subgenres, okay? So when we think about sort of the lower level of the taxonomy, there are two kind of fundamentally different flavors out there, right? So one is Scrum, right? And the other is Kanban. And really the fundamental difference between the two is sprints versus no sprints, right? So what happens is that in Scrum, we say, okay, pick a periodicity, every week, every 2 weeks, every month, whatever. 2 weeks seems to be the sweet spot. Every couple of weeks, everything's gonna come together, and we're gonna close everything up and create what in software we would call a release, right? So it's a checkpoint, it's a milestone, okay, this is a deliverable, again, in the case of software, a deliverable product or a testable product, or whatever your criteria is for a release candidate, that's what it's going to be, right? And so you organize a cycle around that, and and that's the sort of the definition of the sprint, right? So there's this periodic cadence around a delivery, and so because there's that periodic cadence, then you can look at things like the efficiencies in this sprint versus last sprint and so on, right? And so you can sort of generate reporting around that, and that can be interesting. So there's another variety of thing. Think like factory production, right? Where where you've got, multiple assembly lines, and they're all just, they're all sort of turning, right? They're in a steady state already. So there's no sprint, right? It's not like we're gonna stop producing cars for a day while we go over the last 2 weeks' work. So that continuous type of production is what Kanban is for, right? It's exactly like Scrum, except that there's no sprint, right? There may still be a cadence in terms of retrospectives and reviews and all the rest of it, but the fundamental difference is that you're not buttoning everything up into a deliverable every X number of days or weeks or what have you, right? So that's the key difference, and it sounds like a small difference, but it plays out in some major ways, especially around reporting and that kind of thing, because with Kanban you don't have those hard edges between sprints that you can use to sort of aggregate your numbers up into, right? You've just got to come up with different ways to do it. So, but other than that, they're mostly the same, right? It's the same set of practices, just sort of divided up differently in time. Does that make sense? Matt, does that sort of line up with what you got in school?
Yeah, they haven't thrown a lot of Kanban at us. I'm just getting into some Lean Six stuff right now. So
yeah,
but definitely on the Scrum side, and to me, I think the way you just framed it's actually really helpful in contrasting in terms of the deliverable cycle for continuous delivery versus an iterative delivery, and because that's kind of one of the foundational questions, or to me, attention of. There are routine things in doing a lot of what an organization does, and how do you rectify that versus the level of emphasis on doing a sprint or doing an iteration. And it was literally one of the first questions I wrote down is how central is the idea of having the releasable, quote unquote releasable deliverable.
Yeah, now we're getting into philosophy.
That you cut to the chase of. Well, there's this whole other way to apply a bunch of the concept and a bunch of the techniques in the flavor of Kanban, where it sounds like that de-emphasizes it. That'll be good for me to learn more about too.
Let me poke at one thing, just a term you just used, okay? Because this is a term of art that could result in some confusion.
Please.
You said continuous delivery, right? So continuous delivery, or CD, is a term of art that comes up in software a lot, and it is a technical process that gives us the ability when I check in some code, right? When I'm done writing some code, I can have a machine pick up that code, run automated tests, and deploy that code up into a test environment or even a production environment or what have you, right? So the alternative being to do that sort of thing manually, which is not ideal. So CD automates the delivery of code into some target environment. It's not the same thing as the continuous production sort of a thing that you'd see in Kanban, right?
Right.
So lots of Agile software teams use continuous delivery, and obviously everybody should. But at the end of a sprint's worth of continuous delivery, you still want to wrap everything up into a release. Sure. And you see what I'm saying? So just so we're clear on that, because a software guy will trip on that one.
No, that's good. And I just inadvertently, was thinking about delivering, a product that was produced and tripped into that term without realizing it.
Yeah. Well, so let's, you also said something, I think that was interesting, this notion of actually, like having something that you could deliver to a client or what have you, right? So again, with the iterations on purpose, right? Mm-hmm. When I'm out here running quick story. So my girlfriend is working on a business, right? It's a new thing, and it's to do with Instagram and all that sort of thing, right? And she spent quite a few months struggling with what it needed to look like, right? And you know, my advice to her was, you need to focus on revenue. Like you need to focus on, even if it's like one customer, you need to focus on how many dollars are coming in the door. And why? I'm still trying to figure out what it looks like, blah, blah, blah. Well, the answer in her case is, you need some sort of a metric, right? You have to have something that you can measure that's going to tell you if you're heading towards a good place or away from a good place, right? And if it's all theoretical, then it's just a matter of opinion, and nobody really knows, right? So it's not about making a bunch of money now. It's about generating a measurable metric that you can then measure and track and maximize or minimize, right? Same here, right? So you often hear there's a term that's often sort of intimately tied with Agile, the MVP, the minimum viable product, right? And so, we got to get an MVP. We got to get the MVP out the door. We got to get feedback on the MVP, blah, blah. Well, what's the point? The point is to maximize the value of every iteration, right? If I'm going to iterate on purpose, and if I'm going to do all this garbage around, around making iterations and all the meetings and like all that stuff, I want to squeeze as much value as I can out of every iteration. And much of that value, the real value, comes from the people who are actually going to use the thing, right? So you're right. I want to, as soon as possible, and obviously it can't happen typically during the first sprint, but maybe the third, right? I want to have something that I can actually put in front of a user, even if it's garbage, right? Even if the user is my mom. I want to get something that I can put in front of a user who can actually, kick it around and chew on it and give me any feedback, anything, something I can use, something I can grab onto and then begin to iterate around that feedback, right? So now, can you do that with a battleship? No, right? And that's where, that's why, this thing is always going to be a spectrum, and there's always going to be room for, the sorts of, let's call it concentric iteration, right? Like this, the smaller iterations within larger ones, where the larger one may be years long even, right? Where you're not going to, think about the DDGs, or the fast frigates, right? And about the changes that happened between FFG 1 and FFG 60, right? So that's iteration, right? It's iteration over multiple products across an entire product life cycle. I don't think they looked at it that way, but they could have, right? So you can, if you expand your vision beyond one version, one product, one ship, one whatever, then the notion of iteration still applies, and the notion of delivery and feedback and all that stuff still works, right? Again, the question of doing things on purpose instead of by accident. Like when do you decide to set up a system for receiving feedback on how well your frigate works and how much we really like those stabilization planes? Do you do it after the ship is in the water, or maybe you start thinking about that before the ship rolls off the roads, right? So that's the sort of this decision process that can really produce like meaningful changes in the outcome, depending on how you approach iteration on purpose versus iteration by accident. What if you build it into your budget?
Yeah,
right?
You just reminded me that, which is good because it gives me more stories to tell whenever I'm interviewing. But one of the things that I had a pretty strong touch point that I'm using in my head as you're explaining, the subforce when it started to do modernized combat systems. I actually came up with this mix of doing hardware iteration and software iteration. So you had software builds and hardware builds that would be, varied. And of course you had certain hardware that could run certain software, but the idea was that they would iterate every 2 years, which back in, our old Navy days,
Wow.
If you could
That's
actually
fast.
iterate every 2 years, that would have been mind blowing. Of course, it fell on its head. It was probably the right idea, just not sufficiently funded or implemented very well. So you ended up with a whole bunch of ships with a whole bunch of configurations that didn't actually iterate within a ship. You iterated with a class and had, like I said, a whole bunch of different versions.
And every boat in the squadron had its own combination of hardware and software, right?
It was I was a squadron opposite when I dealt with this in the face. And of course, there was the one ship that benefited from all of the iterations, the last, the one that got at the most tail end of it. And certainly we proved to ourselves and developed technology. We had a technology value that was higher, but that you did not necessarily have a fleet of submarines that had maybe it was higher on average just because the net improvement value across the iterations was better than it would have been if you just did, well, we got to take our best guess and everybody's baselined, which is what, the submarines were when I came into force, and that meant it was all baselined to 70s era technology, even though it was just built in the 90s. So it's an interesting thing for me to reflect on in terms of that tension in saying, I want to plan to do it. Well, you go from legacy to, okay, I'm going to anticipate that I know I'm going to need to change, and I need to iterate, and I need to figure out what's the best value add, because we were part of, we had some of the first boats getting some of the first builds. So they were, of course, spent a lot of time working with us and riding our boats on, hey, what were the things that either were broken, and there were a shit ton, or what were the things that, where would you take it from here? So it's resonating in the ability to generate better value in the future iterations was jumped by whatever level, I can't quantify, because you got it in the hands of the users. You got it on a submarine, you got it deployed, and though, were there risks and issues? Yes, but was the next version so much better because you could just have a bunch of folks sitting in a lab not actually trying to use it and abuse it like sailors do? All of a sudden, the next build 2 years later was phenomenally better, even though it was still problematic, et cetera. So that's
state-of-the-art late 1970s technology now.
yeah. Well, anyway, so I appreciate adding to my mental model on that.
Cassandra, what sorts of things? I mean, you said you're working on iterative stuff and whatnot, but what precisely are you working on? Like, what are your products?
So I'm actually at Navy Cyber Warfare Development Group or Command, or is it group? Nick Wedge, Navy Cyber Warfare Development Group. Yeah. Because I'm just used to hearing that Nick Wedge is the
right.
So I mean, pretty much what we do is in the name, and I sit in the N2 spaces, and I was the collection manager, so I supported our analysts who happened to be all CTs, and none of us in there in the N2 actually were intel officers. So I found it funny that they were doing research, but they basically will research things that we're looking at from a cyber perspective, and then based on feedback from either the N3 or the N5 versus developers, N3 being ops, kind of seeing where we can help kind of drive either acquisition, acquiring stuff, or from the N5 who does our kind of cyber development stuff. Find ways, find the vulnerabilities in systems, and then kind of take that research, and once at whatever point in time we feel it's at a good point where we can hand it off to someone else who has a little bit more technical background, understanding of the stuff, and then either can do backwards engineering or software development, then we kind of hand it off to those respective individuals. Gotcha. So that's kind of what I've been doing for the last almost 2 years now. And then I just handed over the collections piece, and now I'm strictly the foreign material program officer. So I handle all the acquisitions side of the house for what our command is looking for. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I find this interesting because we in the N2 only seem to be the ones who have done like a sprint version or an agile type like stuff. I've seen in our acquisitions department a Scrum like board, it looks like a Scrum board, basically, what I've seen of how to understand how Scrum works, but no one really seems to be doing like an Agile type, like formal Agile stuff. But I've gone through a few of the acquisitions courses, and listening to both of you talk, it's like, it very much lines up with kind of how you're describing Agile in terms of, from an acquisition standpoint, the things you're looking for is you have to consider, okay, here's my budget, and then I have to, plan for the contingency of something breaks or it doesn't work, or I have to, the manufacturer is no longer available, like all those extra nuances of where else do I need to find those buffers in that budget to plan for the stuff that you're not really thinking about. So it's kind of interesting. And I'm trying to figure out, with my 6 months-ish left before I start my terminal leave and everything, trying to find ways I can help others in the command, maybe do this a little bit better and maybe help integrate the N2 with our N3 and N5, trying to figure out a better way of helping them.
Gotcha. Well, this might be useful for you then. Here's a question that's worth asking. Let's take Scrum as our example, right? So how is Scrum not just a different way of scheduling a project, right? Why is it not just fun with calendars, right? Okay. So the answer to that question kind of gets into the practice of it. Okay. So we talked about iterating on purpose, and this notion of expecting that things are going to break, whatever that means in your context, and expecting that you're going to have to, adjust your plan, right? And now that's not a new concept, right? I mean, every big project has some sort of a risk management function, right? Where you try to do contingency planning, right? Like, whoa, what if we screw this up, sort of thing, right? But here's the difference. So a sprint is not a sprint, or I should say a sprint is only just a scheduling game until you add one key element, and that key element is testing, right? In other words, we're going to take the jump from, okay, we expect things to go wrong, and we expect to have to, take a step back and figure out how to fix things and change our plan. You take a step from there to, we are going to shake the tree on a regular basis and break things on purpose in order to figure out what needs to be fixed, right? Now, in software, software testing is, we're easy, right? You don't have to actually go out onto a factory floor or into a shipyard. And so we write automated tests, and we actually write the tests while we write the software if we're smart. And so the tests run continuously, but the same principle applies, right? So when I'm planning the sprint, I'm budgeting time and I'm budgeting manpower, effort, labor into the bucket of how do I exercise the shit that I just built, or the shit I built last week or what have you. How do I exercise this stuff in order to find out what's broke? Where do requirements not line up? And that's actually a good way to think about it, right? I got a set of requirements here, right? Here's a bunch of stuff, Agile Jira tickets, requirements documents, whatever. Here's a document of some description that says what I'm supposed to build. Here's the thing I actually built. To what degree do they actually line up? Right?
Is it done?
That's thinking. Well, sometimes they do, often they don't, right? But the procedure whereby you answer that question, the question being, how well does the thing I actually built line up with what I thought I was going to build? That's called testing, right? And testing is an activity that takes time and effort and produces an output, right? The output that it produces in the software world is a set of bugs, right? But no matter what, it's a set of deviations between reality and expectation that need to be addressed, right? Now, every single bug that's generated, if you're smart, you're going to ask a serious question about it. And the question that you're going to ask is, wait a second, since I built this anyway, what if this were the thing I wanted instead of the thing that's in the requirements? Now, obviously, if it's breakage, right? But you know, sometimes the developer has a good idea, you know, misunderstands the requirement in what turns out to be a useful way, and that's called evolution, and it works, right? So it's worth asking. All right, wait, is this a better idea? You know, and if it's not, is there something wrong with the requirements? Okay, so we're not just iterating on the build. We're also iterating on the requirements. We're continuously asking the question, is the thing that we said we wanted to build, the requirement, the thing we should have said that we wanted to build, the mission, right? So we're iterating the build against the requirement and the requirement against the mission within the context of the thing that we built, right? Highly encourage to segregate those two, right? So every problem gets easier when you decouple things, right? When you sort of tease things apart and look at things in isolation, right? So, you know, you can sit in a room with 40 other people and spend 6 hours wrangling about this mission, requirements, build, that whole chain, and does it all line up, and right? Or you can constrain the conversation and look at the requirements and go, okay, let's review. Did this particular element of requirements, do we still want that? Should we have wanted that? Right? That's iteration on requirements. Forget the build for a second. Just focus on that, right? Or, hey, that's what the requirement says. This is what we built. Do they line up? That's a test, right? It's a narrow focus. But by constraining the conversation, you simplify the conversation, right? And you get to a point where, well, okay, there are actually, you know, there are six elements of this requirement, and it's a checklist. And okay, let's go find those 6 things in the build. And are they there, right? Did we meet the requirement? Are they not there? Are they there? When they're there, do they look like what the checklist box says? You see what I'm saying? So, you know, you can always take, not always, the more you're willing to decouple things from one another, the easier it gets to tease things out into line items, and then do just a line by line comparison and say, all right, well, okay, you know, this one document, this requirements document, okay, let's break it into the 120 things that it actually contains, and now, okay, let's do a dozen. Do these line up, right? So that's the, you know, that now you're getting into the sort of the process of problem decomposition, and you know, that's where tools like Jira become very useful, right? Because you can take an epic and break it up into stories and break those up into tasks, and you know, you can decompose things into their constituent parts, but the larger point was this notion of testing, right? Whatever testing looks like. Sometimes testing is a software drill. I'm running, you know, tests on data. Sometimes testing is purely a paper drill. I'm reviewing requirements within the context of what it is that we're trying to do, and maybe within the context of user feedback, like, oh, well, we built this requirement exactly right, but everybody hates it, so maybe we should change the requirement, right? Right? But the key point here is that a sprint is not a sprint until you've done some testing and validated that the output of your sprint is A, correct, and B, what you still want, right? So what does that mean? It means that when you take a 2-week period under Waterfall, right, where you're in the middle of your build and everybody's on the shop floor and everybody's doing stuff and there's checking boxes, right? You get a lot done during that period. Might be the wrong stuff, but you get a lot done, right? As opposed to an agile sprint where the number of deliverables is probably going to be lower, right? But the quality of those deliverables is probably going to be much higher. So the amount of rework required is probably going to be less. And the degree of confidence that you have in where you get after those 2 weeks is going to be somewhat higher. You see the difference? In a waterfall format, for some random 2-week period, you're gunning for it. You got your Gantt chart and everything is in order, and you got your task list, and you're just going, right? It's full steam ahead. And that's just not how Agile works, right? Agile is, it's loopy, right? And so as a consequence, if you have to explain that, right? If you have to explain to a program manager or, an admiral, like why we switched to Agile and all of a sudden everything slowed down. Yes, sir. You're right. On purpose. That was the goal. The goal was to slow things down and do them right.
It's called, I don't know if you guys had this expression in the service force, but sometimes we would say, especially on the plant, nuke plant, you go slow is fast.
Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Certainly a little more conceptual in this case.
Yeah, well, but actually, when the rubber meets the road, it's real, right? I mean, you actually, I got a project right now. We have a hard deadline. We've got to deliver by the middle of September because some other systems are going to shut off, and got to do it, right? So, there's a certain set of milestones, and we're measuring progress, towards those milestones. So, we spent the first month of the project where, 10 years ago, we would have spent that first month just, gunning for the finish line. We spent the first month of the project getting systems set up, right? Getting our machine in order, getting everything functioning, making sure that the requirements kind of were right enough to get going, making sure that our testing platform was functioning on, fully automated, right? That kind of thing, right? And so the ramp up was much slower than it might have been 10 years ago. But now, one of the another thing that we do in Agile is since you've broken things down into story points and you can count things, right? Measure them, right? So you can measure velocity. You can measure, how fast are we actually delivering stuff? And so, early on, velocity kind of low. Now velocity through the roof because all of those systems, all that automation is now paying dividends, right? But in the ramp up period, you got to be prepared to articulate that explanation. Especially when you're dealing with people who maybe haven't seen that before. And oh, by the way, you better be right. Right? I mean, you better actually deliver the acceleration, so, that confidence comes with time. This is where the disciplines matter, right? It's like, it's a little bit like saying, all right, I'm going to spend 6 months in the gym doing it your way, but at the end of it, I better be stronger. And the answer is, well, okay, you will be, but you better engage in these practices, right? Because there are certain practices that you have to do in the gym in order to produce that outcome, right? And I mean, we can talk about some of those practices and kind of what they are and why they matter. But bottom line is, you got to do them.
So just as kind of a one-off question, but to help me picture what you're talking about there, Jace, with what you're working on, how many people is your project? Or how many teams, how many people, what's the laydown in terms of how you're scaling what you're...
So 3 teams. The one team is the client, right? So they've got, it's fluid, but there are probably a dozen people involved on their side. And they're mostly there to operate. We're replacing an existing system. So they're there to operate the existing system and to help us understand. I mean, we extracted requirements from the existing system, but then they have some new asks and they want to fix some stuff, and right. So they're if you think of these segments where I've got mission to requirements to build, right? So they're on the mission to requirements side of it, right? then the actual build kind of breaks down into two sort of bits. There's one team that's been in place. They came aboard a few months before us, and they're building the first bit. They are, shall we say, amateurs. And so they've been doing things kind of what amounts to the old-fashioned way in our industry. Agile is strangely new in my industry. Like, it's been around for 20 years, but people are still kind of getting their arms around it. And everybody's agile, but the actual practices are still sort of a challenge. So these guys they're struggling a little bit. And the quality is not great. And then us, we showed up a couple of months ago. We're working on the other bit, and we're providing a great deal of things like test automation and deployment automation, continuous delivery, right? That we expect are going to help accelerate the other team as well. So the other production team, so I'm going to say 3 or 4 people. We are four of us.
Okay, so that's pretty teeny then.
Well, I mean, it depends, right? So within the context of a battleship, where you got a lot of welders on the floor, it's extremely small. But I mean, just to give you some context, the system that we're building is the beating heart, if you will, of the data management system that powers a financial institution with something on the order of $500 billion under management.
So you're using $1 million worth of labor.
Yeah. So this is, I mean, just in terms of cost, it's probably a $50 or $60 million project, cost to the client.
Yeah.
So it's one of those points where a small number, right? We know how this, a small number of people with the right weapons in the right place can make a hell of a difference, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of where we're at.
It's cool.
And I mean, I talk about these guys as amateurs. They're not really, just compared to us, they are, but whatever. Yeah.
It's good. Oh, you gotta own it.
Yeah. So that's sort of the context.
All right. Appreciate the context.
Yeah. Hi, Cassandra, how big is your team? Like, how many people are you dealing with?
Oh gosh, I mean, the way our sprints work is we have our sailors broken up into like 2 or 3 man teams depending on their seniority and if they've done sprints before. And then they, we kind of let them go, and it's changed. I think I've been there for 2 years, and it's gotten through 3 or 4 different kind of various iterations where we do 6-month sprints. Oof. And then we're like, yeah, well, but within there's deliverables, like at the, the first week out, it's like, here's your topic. You're supposed to go research. At the end of the week, give me your kind of ideas of when you think you can have deliverable 1 done, 2, 3, and 4 on your date. So like some of those are like, we call them like the, like maybe network kind of diagrams and stuff like that. Like the big concept picture, I think it's called like an OV, overview basically. And then, as we go further in the sprint, you have more detailed, obviously, network type diagram stuff. But, and then it changed from 6-month sprints, and then we did 3-month sprints. And then the last time we did it, we kind of, it really depended. Some of them we had, hey, just work on this for 3 weeks. Do a quick, like, go out there, do your research and see what you come back with. Some of them we had a better idea that there's a lot of stuff out there. So those went a little bit longer. So we started realizing that not everything fits in that 6 months, or not even everything fits in 3 months. So we kind of started realizing, okay, this one we think is probably more like a 3-week sprint. You over here, you've got, 3 months, 6 weeks kind of thing. And that's kind of how
this is good stuff.
Yeah.
This is really good stuff. So why? All right, we can probably agree on one thing here, right? A 1-day sprint would be crazy, right? But why? Matt, why do you think a 1-day sprint would be nuts?
I don't know. I might even challenge that idea, because one of the analogies I'm exploring in my head is if you look at how a joint headquarters works operationally, you've got your different decision cycles, and at least at the operational level and even at the combatant command level, you can have daily fragmentation orders. So if I view the net set of orders that a headquarters issues as its working software, is my mental model I'm exploring, and they issue an update every day, that is a sprint of sorts. Now, fair enough. Is there really a lot of iterative value to that? No, and are you employing a lot of agile?
Bingo. Okay, that's the thing. That's what I'm getting at, right?
No.
So a sprint has a certain the cadence of a sprint involves certain activities. They're practices that are associated with a sprint. Things like daily stand-ups, retrospectives, sprint planning, backlog review. All those things are part of a sprint, right?
Yeah.
So a daily sprint doesn't make sense, because if you had daily sprints, or every 2 days or 3 days, the cost of an iteration, the cost of engaging in all of those sprint activities would overwhelm the benefit of the sprint, right? Iterations would become too expensive, and basic economics, the more expensive something is, the less of it you get, right? So the fundamental reason why we don't engage in a classic sprint every day, every couple of days, is because the elements of the sprint, the cost of those elements would overwhelm the benefit of the sprint, right? Okay, so now let's go the other way. If the cost benefit isn't worth it to do a sprint every day, why not do one every 6 months? And Cassandra, this is what I wanted to get at where you were at, right? Well, okay, now obviously if I do a sprint every 6 months, now I've got things are really spread out. The overhead of a sprint compared to the amount of work done within the sprint is now very, very low, right? Why not do one per project, right? Now we're back in Waterfall. Well, the answer is that, and this gets to the practice part of it, right? If I have to line up my deliverables with the edges of a sprint, what does that do? That forces me to decompose my deliverables into bits that can be delivered within a sprint. It is a practice, you see? So if I've got a 6 month sprint, then I can go, hey Joe, go away, come back in 6 months and show me what you got, right? But if I've made the commitment that we're gonna button it up every 2 weeks, then I, as a project manager or as a team, I've got to figure out how to decompose this problem. And decomposition is the heart of design, right? If you don't know what the parts of your problem or of your solution are, if you don't know what the parts are, then you can't arrange them, right? It's just one big blob. And so the fundamental benefit of going with the shorter sprints is that you simply have no choice. You've got to break things up. And so your guys say, oh, well, you're going to have a 2 week sprint and you're going to have a 3 week sprint. No. Take a day and come back to me and explain to me how are you going to decompose this problem, so that you can tell me which part you're going to deliver this week, and then which part you'll deliver next week, maybe along with something else, right? And maybe that means, okay, this week I want to see a high level diagram. In fact, let's go from high to low. So instead of giving me, a big giant network diagram this week, you know what I want? I want 3 high level diagrams from you, right? There are 3 things that I know are important. I'm just making this up. 3 things that I know are important. So Joe, so this week, what do you say? Give me 3 high level diagrams, and then let's review those at the sprint review, and let's figure out which one of those you're going to go deep on. And oh, by the way, since you already did the high level, the lower level is going to, it's going to come a little bit easier, and so you'll probably be able to fit that part within a sprint, right? So it sounds almost trivial. Just pick a number, right? But the truth is that the requirement to break things, the requirement to time box deliverables enforces a practice of problem decomposition that often gets lost right? We often just don't. We just we throw something over the fence to a guy who may not be equipped. You know, the skill set required to do low-level work and the skill set required to do higher-level abstract thinking often don't live in the same person, right? So you might have a guy who will be really good at sort of digging into the details and finding out what belongs in that lower-level diagram. But when you handed the higher-level problem, he's kind of lost. He's like, I'm completely paralyzed here, right? He needs help. But, you know, he doesn't know maybe how to ask for it. And oh, by the way, if you haven't established a practice of daily stand-ups, like real daily stand-ups, there's no place where he can ask for help, right? And so as a consequence, he's just kind of muddled through it. And it might take him 6 weeks because he doesn't even really know how to get started, right? So there's that balance, right? Between, you know, we want short sprints because they force us to break things up, but we want long sprints because we don't want to deal with, you know, a large amount of sprint overhead, right? For a lot of software teams, 2 weeks appears to be the sweet spot. You know, where is that sweet spot? It just kind of depends. I will also say that so these sprint activities, right? You know, things like backlog reviews and retrospectives and all the rest of it. The longer your sprint is, the more stuff piles up, right? So if I can get my backlog review done in an hour for a 2-week sprint, how long is it going to take for a 4-week sprint, right? And at what point does my backlog review become a useless evolution? Because now I got 14 people sitting in a room for 4 hours and they just hate each other by the end of it, and they're not actually getting anything useful done, right? So one of the practice points in Agile is to keep, you know, if a meeting involves more than a couple of people, you want that meeting extremely short. You want, or rather, you want it as long as required, but absolutely as short as possible. And so what that means is that each one of those meetings that does involve more than a couple of people has a set of practices around it that are, they sound like religion, right? Like you said, Matt, you know, like nobody talks except the people and whatever. But what they really are heuristics. They're rules of thumb that are designed to force that meeting to be as short and targeted and effective as possible, right? What you don't want is to have people sitting in a meeting who have no reason to be there except that they were there when it began, right? That doesn't serve anybody. And if you do that and you call it Agile, guess what happens? People begin to hate Agile, right? Except the thing that they hate isn't the thing that it's supposed to be, right? So let me stop there. Does that all that sort of make sense?
Yeah, I thought it was brilliant in terms of when you got to the part where the length of the sprint relative to the production part. Okay, that was pretty intuitive, but to me, when you got to that, the length of the sprint also gets you to that sweet spot of bridging between conceptual and whether or not it's ops or execution or the detail-oriented people. So the human nature part of it, to me, that was a really great insight that I would encourage you to throw at people that are looking at this, because I see that tension in how organizations work all the time, and I don't think that's unique to Agile, but how a sprint comes into play and the sprint length comes into play as a way to attack that's really cool.
The reason why we call it a sprint, right? 26.2 miles ain't a sprint. Right?
Unless you're from Kenya, Ethiopia.
Yeah, fair enough, right?
Whoever the world record holder is, I forget.
But look, you know what you said, Matt, about human nature is really true, right? And that's another key aspect of this. That people want to, they need to feel forward motion, right? And if you've got this thing that started 4 months ago and you got 2 months to go before you can kind of know how you're doing, it's just like it's. I took a vacation since this thing started, right? You don't feel the velocity, right? Whereas when you've got and again, it can be too short. Like a 1 week sprint can feel really frenetic, right? But you know, I had a thing that started a couple of weeks ago, and we're coming up on the end of it, and I'm like, go because I want to get my shit done, and okay, and how'd you do? And okay, I got it all done. All right, here comes the next one. Here we go. And you know, it's a cadence. It's a sustainable cadence, but it's definitely, you feel it. And again, with human nature, right? So what happens with a 2-week sprint? Typically, the sprint will end and begin in the middle of the week, like on a Wednesday, right? And so if you let's just start from that Wednesday, right? So Tuesday afternoon, everything gets buttoned up, and like you roll into Wednesday morning, and the sprint changes. Wednesday afternoon, you've got, you know, like some sort of presentation where you sit down with the stakeholders and say, okay, here's what we got done, and here's our little demo and everything, right? And okay. Now, a couple of days ago, you had your sprint planning thing, so you know what's next. You know, you come in Thursday morning, and here's the new board, and like we're all ready to, you know, we're going to start marching our shit across the board, and okay. Friday, we have our retrospective. Okay, let's everybody take a step back. All right, what happened last sprint? How'd that go? You know, should we do things a little bit differently? Okay, cool. All right. So you go home for the weekend. Monday morning comes. Now this is the week between sprints. What are we doing? There's all those meetings. None of that shit. I've got 1 week where we're just like head down. We got our daily stand-ups. We're just doing it. We're going, right? And so we're super productive all week long. We feel like we're gathering momentum, and we get to the end of the week, and like, yeah, how are we looking? Like on Friday or Thursday, yep, we're going to have a sprint planning meeting, right? Okay, how are we doing? And this is like team leadership, and what's coming up for next sprint, and right, based on kind of where we think we're going to be. And okay, so we have that whole week where we're doing nothing but gathering momentum, and then the next week comes, and okay, now we're racing for the finish line, and the new sprint's coming up, and you know, and we get there, and boom, there we are again, right? So there's this, you know, you've got this on-off cycle where each week, every other week, you're either like in it, like sprinting, actually sprinting, gathering momentum, or you're reaching the finish line and kind of taking a step back, seeing where you are, and then stepping off for the next sprint, right? So that's a nice cadence, right? Like you're always either like running as fast as you can, or finishing and starting the next one, you know. And whereas if you've got a 4-week sprint, then, you know, it's that middle week in between the week where you started sprinting and the week where you kind of feel like you're on vacation, right? Like, I've been doing this for a week. I got a week to go. Like, I'm gonna pace myself this week, right? When the sprint's every other week, you're not pacing yourself. There's no room to pace yourself. You're either sprinting or you're finishing and starting. You know what I mean?
In reflecting on what you're throwing at us there, yeah. Jason, to me, I think it's a sign of my legacy thinking that it's got to be all about finding the right bite-sized chunks, which kind of connects back to your previous point. Yeah. Because, you know, I started to think about getting underway on a ship, right? You know, pulling in, pulling out. You know, there's always that excitement of and stuff you got to get done to get a ship in and out of port. But your first week out, people weren't on schedule, and they weren't really humming, and it wasn't really until that second week where you started. People were on point, and you were getting a lot of training value or whatever you're trying to do. And whereas I'm trying to figure out where my mental model needs to adapt, and I go, well, if I'm not thinking about things that take a long time to do, which I think is a legacy way of thinking, and if I've really structured manageable bite-sized pieces by a self-organizing team, then you go, oh yeah, you can jump right back into it, and it's something that it's got to be doable in 7 working days, right? 7 or 8 working days. So here's
the kind of the distinction that I hear you making, right? So a sprint is not a deployment; it's a watch cycle.
That's probably a better model,
right? So when you say your guys are settling into the watch cycles and blah blah blah, so that thing that they're settling into is the sprint cadence.
Yeah, you know
what I'm saying?
Yep.
Yeah, and each part of it has its own character, and that's you design that, right? So it is whatever you need it to be, but there's there's testing, there's deployments, there's whatever thing you're building. It's going to be specific
It's kind of
to
like
that.
a watch, though. You got your watch routine.
Yeah. It's a short-term routine, and the one thing that you don't want is for people to, and again, you know, the actual how many weeks or what have you is going to depend on your application, but you never want people to feel a sense of stasis, right? You never want them to feel like things are standing still. They're either recovering from something and gearing up for something, or they're moving to a finish line, right? So every effective Agile project that I've ever been on, there's always been a sense of not that you feel like you're behind all the time, but you can't lollygag along. You feel a sense of urgency, right? Not oh my God, I'm going to shoot myself, but more like, let's move it along, you know? Yeah. So you feel a sense of urgency, and that it's contagious. It's contagious across the team if it's done right. And by the way, the practice of running the meetings accentuates that, right? So if I'm willing to sit in a 4-hour meeting with 40 people and waste their time, what am I communicating? I'm communicating that urgency is not really a factor here. On the other hand, if I'm in a meeting,
it's not worth it.
Right?
That's what you're communicating.
Yeah. But you know, instead, if I've got my a dozen team members in a meeting, and I'm like, okay, Joe, what did you work on yesterday? What were your roadblocks, and what are you going to work on today? Well, I think I might take a vacation this week. Joe, forgive me. What did you work on yesterday? What are you working on today? And what are your roadblocks? Right? So there's an aspect of leadership there, and that's the Scrum Master's whole job, and we could get into why the daily stand-up is the beating heart of Agile, but the Scrum Master's whole job there is to maintain, not just to maintain a level of focus in the meeting because that gets it over quickly and people can move on, but to maintain the focus because it communicates to the team that we have a job to do here. There's a practice associated with that job, and we came into this meeting with a level of velocity, and we're going to exit this meeting with the same level of velocity, right? We win the meeting when we get through the requirements of the meeting and actually have time left over that we can give back to the people so they can use that time to get a head start on their sprint items.
Check.
That's a winning meeting. And by the way, the team that I'm working with right now, we've got a woman who's running she's the sort of project manager / sprint Scrum Master, and but by now I am sure that she's doing this on purpose, right? Every single meeting, there's time left over. She never fails, right? And so every single meeting, she's like, well, looks like we're done a little early. I'll give you some time back and go get it. And we're all like, woohoo, out of school a little bit early, right? It works. It's intensely motivating, and it communicates. We could say whatever we want to, right? It's what we do that communicates things, really. And so this communicates more strongly than anything you could possibly imagine. Yep, we got shit to do, and we're going to go do it, right? So it's a great practice.
Yeah, I like how you said that: enter and exit the meeting with the same level of velocity. It's a good tagline, I think. So for anything, honestly, for any type of meeting.
Yeah. Right.
But I definitely understand, especially this last iteration, the sailors definitely appreciated the shorter version of the sprints, and they had a lot more to say that it was easier, even though it was more rushed. They weren't what you were exactly saying. If it's too long, you're gonna hit this point where you're like, well, I got another 3 more months on this, so I'll take my time. And so it definitely helped kind of move folks a little bit faster, which was good. And allowed us to move through some topics a lot quicker, or, categories of is this even worth it? No, it's not. It was a quick, yep, in the door and out the door, and here's why we're not going to continue to pursue it. Yep. But the other thing we did find useful this last go around is when we started, and trying to reiterate with our sailors is that a lot of people don't understand, one, how to write requirements, especially if you're a developer trying to explain to the Intel analyst the requirement, and it just doesn't, it's not the same language. So, you know, trying to find almost like a mediator who can go like, okay, I can take your geek speak and translate that into something my analysts can at least research and understand a little bit better. But actually having them sit alongside like an analyst kind of like lower level AO kind of level where they would work alongside doing their research, and then having someone who's actually submitted the requirements or working in that area going, hey, just a quick, you have time, let's look over this real quick. And that helped kind of refine like, okay, maybe I need to research a little bit more, refine where I'm researching in my topic.
Okay.
So
what have you just done?
Found that useful.
You've just defined an element of your sprint cycle, right? An element that can be scheduled and budgeted, right? So that's, you know, that's how it works, right? Every, and we just talk about sprints, but Kanban's the same thing. Like every sprint cycle is going to differ depending on the requirements of the project, right? And creating that touch point, formally creating that touch point. Okay, this is our cadence. This is what we do during a sprint. This is what we do on Monday of week 1, on Tuesday of week 1. These are the meetings that we have, blah, 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 right? That's that project level design. Now, we iterate on that too, right? So the mechanism of iterating on the sprint cadence design is a meeting called the retrospective, right? So once, and it doesn't have to be long, half an hour will do it, okay? But once a sprint, sit down, take a chill pill, and ask the question, how do we like this? What's broken? What works? What can we fix? How should we change the cadence? So it's a self-adjusting animal as, you know, as time goes on, right? Now, another sort of key element here, okay? So you've got this thing that previously you assigned as a 6-month bite, right? There's a 6-month sprint item, okay? And now I'm sitting here waving my hands and saying, oh, you got to break that down, decompose that, make it 2 weeks long. Well, who's going to do that? I mean, that is in itself an item of work, right? The decomposition. So one of the things, when I decide to go with say 2 week sprints or what have you, right? And so now, wow, if I'm going to assign things that are 2 weeks long, I've got to decompose them. What have I've just created some work for myself, right? The work is the decomposition. Did I budget for that before? I still had to do it, right? I mean, before I can write the code, I still have to kind of know what the pieces are. But I only, you know, in my waterfall model, I only budgeted the time for producing the thing, not the time for doing the analysis that tell me what to produce, right? So here, when you know, I've got my cycle and I've got this requirement coming in the door, and I'm like, wow, that's a big giant requirement. How do I break that up? Well, guess what? Decomposition is a totally valid work item, right? So you don't have to start that thing right now. Maybe the activity around that epic is decomposition. And you can do that in a sprint, right? You can assign it to somebody and say, okay, look, I want you to take this big giant elephant and I want you to break it down into its constituent parts and come back to me with a set of stories that represent this thing where each story is, you know, doable in a sprint. It's going to take somebody a couple of days to accomplish that. It's now you've planned to do the work, you've budgeted the work, you know how long approximately it's going to take, you've got somebody assigned to it, it's going to get done, and next sprint, you're going to come into that next sprint with a nice, useful set of stories that can now be sequenced and scheduled and assigned and blah, 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 right? So that's a perfect example of how iteration works and how the process of iteration is not just about production. It's about the evolution of requirements, the evolution of testing, the evolution of what needs to be done, or of what needs to be, of a high-level requirement into a low-level requirement into a to-do list, right? Each of those evolutions, each of those decompositions is a totally appropriate target for sprint work. And, you know, and maybe assigned to a totally different person or not than the person who actually does the implementation, right? Like you said, Cassandra, where, in order to write this requirement, I kind of really need the stakeholder and the developer, the implementer, whatever. They got to sit down together. They've got to do this together, right? In order to get a requirement that is meaningful to this guy, that this guy can actually build, right? So we're going to assign this thing, guys. You're both working on this, right?
All right, Jace. Any other things you want to try to wrap tonight? Otherwise, I got a bunch of stuff. I'll take a rain check if you're willing to do this again.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'd love to do it again. Sorry, I blah blah. I have a tendency to run on. I hope this is interesting and useful to you guys.
Oh yeah, definitely.
This is great.
Oh, excellent. All right. Well, let's do it again. I haven't really thought beyond this one in terms of scheduling. So I don't know. I don't know if next week will work, but if not, probably the week after. So why don't we just the three of us get our heads together and figure out a good date, and then we'll invite other people to join us if they'd like to. And meanwhile, this thing, I'll chop the beginning and and probably not much of the end off, and just put it out there. All the three of us are okay with that, right? Okay. Good. All right, good. So I'll just put it out there on YouTube so that the folks can see it. I'm not going to worry about taking out clips or anything like that. We'll make it as easy as possible. And yeah, thank you. Right, thank you for joining us, Cassandra. I wasn't sure there was going to be anybody but me and Matt, so it was nice to have a third corner to the triangle.
Okay. Jason, I really appreciate you throwing this idea at me. I've got an interest in learning, and you got a heck of a lot of experience and knowledge on this. So I appreciate you having the opportunity to learn from you.
My pleasure. I hope we can find. So there's got to be somebody else who's got some other topic under his belt who can do something similar. On a different topic. I like this idea. The bull session thing. It's fun.
Oh yeah, me too. This is nice. Yeah.
Cool. All right, guys. Well, have a great. I guess I'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah. See you tomorrow, Jason.
All right.
How you doing?
All right. See you.
All right. Take care.
Bye.